Welcome to The Upshot, Multi-World Disc Golf's podcast about the latest in the disc golf world. I'm the editor, Charlie Eisenhood. Joining me, Josh Mansfield, and we are continuing to approach this upcoming 2023 disc golf season, and we're about 3 weeks from All-Stars, about a month from LVC, and I'm just ready for the season to just hurry up and get here, Josh.
I feel the exact same way. It's so funny because at the beginning of the off season, we started hitting the shows and we're like, man, the off season's going by so quick. And then we hit like 4 weeks out and then just stopped. It's like we were like, oh man, we want more content. We need more news. We want the season to start, because you can only talk about the off season stuff so much before you're like, I just want to see the golf.
Oh yeah. At the end of contract stuff, I was like, I just can't talk about this anymore. I'm just done.
Yeah. Happy birthday. You had a birthday this weekend?
Thank you. Yes.
How was it? Do anything fun?
It was good. I was covering an ultimate tournament out in California, but it's always nice. I go to Santa Barbara every year. Beautiful. Went out to dinner with some of the Ultra-World folks and had a shot of tequila with a candle in the top of the cup. So that was fun.
Very, very fun.
Yeah.
It was also paired with Heartbreak on Sunday.
Yeah. The one thing I wanted for my birthday was not all of the quarterbacks on the roster to get hurt. 49ers just got obliterated. I mean, it was terrible. I don't know.
Yeah.
Our luck was horrible. The refs were horrible. I don't know, man. The Eagles have had the world's easiest path to the Super Bowl of all time. I'm very salty about it.
Is that statistically true?
I mean, I don't know if it's statistically true, but they played a horrendous Giants team, and then they played a team with no quarterback.
Well, that's been the critique of the Eagles for like the entire season. So I'm curious if that is statistically true for the entire season that the Eagles they may have had the easiest schedule in the league. I know they had a really easy schedule. I don't know if it was number one, but it was close to it. Yeah, I don't know. I'd be curious. I'm sure there's some people pulling those numbers.
Chiefs, Eagles, make your pick.
As much as you were ragging on the Eagles, I think I'm going to take the Eagles. I really think Eagles are going to win the trench fights this year. They're going to run the ball better, and their front four are just so good. And look, Mahomes can run, but he said in the post-game interview that his ankle wasn't feeling great. It didn't feel good when he was running on it. And with an Eagles team who is going to just try and take advantage of that, I think I like Eagles.
I'm taking the Chiefs.
I
think Mahomes is a magician. I actually think the Eagles didn't really look like they were that good against the 49ers, to be honest. Their offense was struggling most of the game. We gave them a million penalties, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to go too much into it. I'm very salty about the whole situation. The Chiefs' defense isn't as good as the 49ers.
That's what I was about to say.
We'll see. Should be an interesting game. I'm actually taking Rihanna to win the Super Bowl. That's what I think.
Okay, all right.
Is what we're going to see. So, all right. So here's what we got to do today. We are going to be talking about our top 3 tournaments to rewatch to get pumped for the season. We also breaking today, right now. It just happened. The Disc Golf Pro Tour announced its post-production media plan for 2023. And there are some very interesting changes. We're going to get to that in a little bit. But first, we do have some mulligans to get to. So thank you to our what's the term for, like, it's not eagle-eyed, for someone who has great hearing. What is it?
I don't know.
Eagle-eared. No. Our sharp listeners. We talked a little bit about Prodigy last week in our manufacturer rankings, and mentioned that they, just didn't really do very much in the offseason. I think that generally that is true, but some folks pointed out they re-signed Alden Harris. That is true. And they lost Gavin Babcock, who went to Discmania. That is also true. So thank you for the notes. Re-signing Alden Harris is a nice little move for sure.
It is. Yes. We talked I think that's especially a nice move given all of the young players that we've talked about are going to be coming up at the end of their contracts next season.
Right.
And that Prodigy is going to have to figure out. Right. So keeping Alden Harris for Did he sign just a 1 year contract?
I think it's a 2-year. Let me check. Let me check the tracker. No, it's a 1 year.
It is 1 year. Yeah. So I mean, it delays the difficult off season next year for Prodigy, but good job keeping him for another one. Right. I think that's a good start for a team that is going to have to do a lot of work next off season to keep everybody.
Josh, you got called out on a mulligan here as well on your statement that Infinite Discs, and I'm starting to quote here, benefits from promoting their least sold brands, in quotes, like their own molds and ThoughtSpace in particular. Josh, have you not seen the blog post from Infinite stating their top selling discs for 2022? In almost every category, drivers, mid-ranges, etc., sales of Infinite brand discs and TSA molds are in the top 5 of sales, and in some cases outselling Innova and Discraft molds. In the case of Clash discs, you are correct that their sales are lower, but not so on those others.
I will take a half mulligan on this one because I'm shooting from the hip a little bit here. But if I remember right, Eric Oakley was with TSA last season as well and did Infinite collab discs with like Infinite Stamp TSA Eric Oakley signature discs. So yes, you're right that they weren't least sold last year, but this is a continuation of the strategy. Compare TSA sales from Infinite like 2 years ago, maybe, right? And then see what happens after Eric Oakley signed to Infinite Open Bag and then signed with TSA. And I think that's when you start to see the TSA improve, because that certainly wasn't the case 2 years ago. I don't think that TSA was a top seller. And so
it's true.
My point being, right, this is a continuation of a media strategy rather than maybe a starting. It's a continuation of a sponsorship strategy that has, as pointed out in this email, and the mulligan I should take, that has proven some success that I think is going to work well for Clash and continues to ensure that discs like their own molds and TSA stay at the top of those charts. Because, like, we talked about Discraft, Innova, they sell themselves.
It's very interesting. So Infinite actually has a little chart that shows monthly disc sales for each brand. If you go to the post about their best-selling brands of 2022, you scroll down, there's a moving chart with monthly disc sales for each brand. And it's just, if you go back, into the 2015, 16, 17, just massively dominated by Innova. Massively. Mm-hmm. In a random month, August 2017, the second best-selling brand was Discmania, and then Dynamic Discs, and then Discraft. Now, you can see when Paul Macbeth signed to Discraft.
Yeah.
Like,
I remember this.
2019, immediately, Discraft flies up the board into second place behind Innova. Okay? And then you start to see Infinite Discs really pop up onto the scene. Starting a little bit in 2019, they start to move up the board. But then, like, in 2021, it becomes, like, number 2, number 3, and even takes over in certain months as the number 1. TSA doesn't make big moves up the board until like 2022. And then you're starting to see them sometimes in the top 5. And as of last month, December 2022, Infinite number 1, in a very close second, then about, maybe 15-20% drop to Discraft, and then another maybe 30% drop to TSA and number 4, and then Lone Star number 5, MVP number 6. I think you can see, like, whether those things hold up. Those brands right there, obviously Infinite is doing like holiday sales on their own molds, and it's the only place you can buy those discs. So naturally, that's going to kind of like cause that to be a bigger number in some cases. But what I think is interesting is that you do really see the effect of what's being talked about in the sport. Like, imagine what the numbers are going to look like for January 2023. I mean, how much money would you bet that MVP is going to be number 1?
Good bet.
It's a good bet. It's a good bet. So it matters, right? The marketing matters. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be interesting. Whether that holds up long term. Is a Lone Star going to stay in the top 5 for a long time to come? I don't know, but
that was the result of all those amateurs having to change their bags to 90% Lone Star. Right? Like,
that just seems like a bad deal, man. I don't know.
I agree, but anyway,
we'll give you a sticker and a disc, and then you just, you promote us, and that's. and it's contractually obligated.
Oh.
So thank you to Nathan for the email there. And I have one from David here, who took issue, Josh, with our manufacturer rankings, and he did a list of the top teams by 2022 tour points, and that list I'll go 1 to 10: Discraft, Innova, Latitude 64, Prodigy, DD, MVP, Discmania, DGA, Lone Star, TSA. Okay, so that's just backwards looking total points accumulated on the tour.
Real quick. Oh, sorry. That was his list.
That was his list. That was not our list.
Got it. Okay. I was like, that didn't sound right.
No, that was his list. That's just the 2022 tour points aggregated for each of the brands and then sorted.
That's okay.
And so, I emailed back and I said, hey, so like, where do you think we were wrong? Obviously, this list is different than ours, but we're also forward looking. Mm-hmm. And there's some, for instance, Eagle barely played last year. Like, you have to take that into account. And he said, I'd say that Latitude, who we had lower than number 3 for sure. I'd say that Latitude has the best top end player in the game in Chris and Tatar. And for as much as you guys talk about European talent, they are the manufacturer that is positioned to take advantage of that, with Albert Tom, Linus Karlsson, Larry Lettinen playing pretty well in the Disc Golf Pro Tour, and Jakub Semerad playing well in Europe. Throw in some other depth players like Jake Hebenheimer, Tristan Tanner, Kevin Kiefer, Connor O'Reilly, and Rebecca Cox, and I think this team is deeper and more complete than everyone except Innova and Discraft. I also think Prodigy is way too low at number 7. Like I said, they got all of their points in MPO, where it's harder to get points because of the field depth, and they kept almost all of that talent for this next season. I understand it's a power ranking, and they didn't do much this offseason, but you got to give credit to how strong that team really is. Kevin Jones had a pretty terrible year, but think how much you guys were still talking about Prodigy thanks to their collective level of talent. It was a fun exercise to do. Totally agree, doesn't tell the whole story. It might not predict too well either, but it was fun to think of tour points as a commodity that manufacturers are looking to collect.
I mean, there's a lot of really good information in this email and some good points. I think the big one on Latitude is 2 things, right? You can collect a lot of points with that kind of depth that that was highlighted. But the problem is when we're looking at power rankings, one of the big factors that we took into consideration was the ability to win, right? And like you look at that MPO team, and Linus Karlsson had a couple good tournaments and he was highlighted. Albert Tom won a silver series, but I mean, none of those guys were really competing for a meaningful win very often, if at all, the last year. And you're right, like Kristen, top tier talent. But I mean, the rest of those players, even if they're accumulating points because they're placing in the top 20 to 30 range, that is not very meaningful to me when I consider a power ranking. And I think the wins have to be something that are evaluated and taken as important, which is why I think that our rankings differ from just a raw manufacturer cut points look at the player team, at the current teams. So that's my point on Latitude. Any other thoughts on that one?
I mean, I agree. I think that, I'm not going to disagree at all about the depth of Latitude.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a consideration with what to do with them. I think there's certainly a case to be made that they could go higher because they're way deeper than, like, let's say MVP.
Right.
Or Discmania. But those teams have win potential that's a lot higher, which I think is more potent than having a lot of middle of the pack pros. So, I mean, it just depends on how you want to, draw the lines up. Regarding Prodigy, look, I mean, yes, they have a great MPO team, but they have 0 FPO presence, and they're going to be punished for that, and they were. That's all I have to say about that. But great thoughts, great email. I think if you do it backward looking rather than forward looking, the list looks different.
It does.
I think the list looks different. So, all right, let's keep it rolling, and let's get over to some quotes from a podcast recently over in Europe. Henna Blomroos was interviewed on Disc Golf Stream, and so like a little vlog conversation over there. And somebody, Northern Investor, over on the disc golf subreddit did the kind job of translating the key points from Finnish into English. And I thought it would be interesting if we took a look at what Henna had to talk about. Now, we're not going to go through every single thing, but much like Evelina, who was also interviewed recently and had made some pretty similar points, Henna is really starting to take her training more seriously. And I thought that this was pretty interesting. She said, and again, this is an English translation of Finnish that is not confirmed by me. But I'm going to trust that this is about right. Last off season, I threw a lot outside on ice and lost my technique, being careful not to slip. It took half of the season to find it again. So this off season, I haven't thrown almost at all. So now I think this interview was recorded a couple months ago at this point. So perhaps things have changed on that front. But I guess she talked about the fact that because she was having to like shorten up her swing to deal with the fact that she was throwing on like icy tee pads or icy fairways, it like really messed with her mechanics on tour. And if you remember, she struggled at the beginning of the season. Remember, we were so excited to see Henna on tour, and she came out to LVC and like didn't really have it. And then, by the end of the year, she was, competing at the top level and, really just a putter holding her back. Couple other notes here. She said, I've always been putting with bad technique. That is half of the problem. Half is mental. So I wonder if that means she's going to rework the putt, Josh.
She talks about how she's been working out. If she's not throwing really at all during the poor weather conditions and is prioritizing then maybe putting, something that can be done indoors and is, you can work around the weather a little bit more with putting, then she is reworking that technique. I really hope so. I think that's something that we have talked about, that it was a combination of those two things. So we felt like the technique didn't really set her up for success. But I really hope that it does fix that, because, man, if she learns how to putt, like the translation that we have on this quote, after all the problems, I was very happy coming second at Worlds. If I ever fix my putting, let's see what can happen.
Yeah.
Yes.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Right there with you, Anna.
Couldn't have said it better. It should be exciting to see, and I'm glad that she's prioritizing it. It's interesting, though. This is a sentiment shared by multiple players about throwing on ice and how it affects their form in the offseason. Remember, I think it was 2 years ago that Haley King said she doesn't play hardly at all in the offseason,
right, because
she feels like her form is detrimentally impacted by having to adjust the swing to inclement conditions. And so that there's something there, and it's going to be interesting to watch as professional players, as this game becomes more and more monetized, more and more professional, and more competitive, how players are adapting off-season routines to that. Are they going to find more indoor opportunities, right? Throwing indoor soccer fields? Is it look like a lot of net throwing? Is it more players moving to warmer climates so that they can practice more in the off-season? If people are making the kind of money that if more people are making the kind of money that the likes of Paul and Ricky and Simon are making, it's very conceivable to me that people move to warmer climates for 7-figure salaries, even 6-figure salaries, right? In order to prioritize being able to practice during the off season.
Another quote here from Henna. I love seeing Kristen dominate even with an injury. We, the European FPO, are finally showing the U.S. field that we are not just recreational fun throwers, but can really compete. By the way, Kristen said that having the injury might have actually been a good thing because it taught her to play more cautiously and more safely and not just go all out on every single throw. That sounds familiar.
Who else has said that?
Why does that ring a bell? I don't know. Like, Kristen was dominating before the injury, and then after like one bad tournament, dominated after the injury. I don't really think that was necessarily like something that she needed, but I do think that there's a lot that professional disc golfers can learn from these quotes. Like, there's enough players on tour who throw so far and are so talented and yet cost themselves strokes tournament after tournament, after round after round after round, by being too aggressive instead of just taking a safer choice. I mean, there's got to be at least a half dozen players in MPO that describes. Like, why doesn't everybody just try to play a little bit smarter golf?
Could you imagine if Drew Gibson went out of bounds half as often as he does?
As Ezra Aderhold. That's what I'm saying. Like, if you go look at peripheral stats, right? Like Circle 1 in regulation, Circle 2 in regulation, and you look at the top players, like some of them are like, both of those guys are way up there, way up the board.
Mm-hmm.
And the OB rate's just way too high.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I just feel like there's enough people who have like had this sort of epiphany. Like, you shouldn't be forced to get hurt to come up to this realization.
I think it's interesting because when you read like more safely, you thought kind of in conjunction with more cautiously. I thought though, and I think you were correct, but when my mind went to is like when we talked to Gannon Burr, he talks about how he has a pitch count basically of forehands that he'll throw in practice before he gets to a tournament.
Sure.
And I think this is also going to be interesting to see the way players start to adapt their practice routines around health. And as courses get longer and longer, how do you practice? How do you prepare? How often are you throwing full power drives? And how can you minimize and do the fewest number possible while still getting in an effective practice routine? That's something else that, especially players like Henna and Evelina, who can throw a mile, they also are going to have to be thinking about that. And so just another interesting point that I thought of that I don't think was the intent of that quote. But
yeah. She is planning to come to the U.S. in the early spring and play through probably Champions Cup. And then she's going to go back to Finland for May, then coming back to the U.S. for 3 tournaments in June, then back to Europe for the European swing, and then back to the U.S. again after the European Championships for the last 2 months of the year. So getting that travel in. Stick with one airline, get that status.
I'm excited to see it. It's going to be so much fun to watch. I really hope this pays off and we get to see the kind of success out of Henna that we predicted. Henna and Evelina, right? I mean, it's still so crazy to me. Going into the COVID season, like Kristen was kind of not the afterthought, but it was like, Henna and Evelina and then Kristen. Right? Like they were the favorites. And then Kristen had some really incredible, came over to the US earlier, had the season last season, obviously, and really established herself as the top player in the world at the time. But
let me just remind you, Josh.
Yep.
Henna is 22 years old. Just keep that in mind. There's a lot of years of these players being at the top of the sport. And I don't think it's an impossibility that those are like number 1, number 2 in some order in a year or two.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't think it's impossible. Now, they got to figure out the putting. We know this, but
right.
They haven't really taken this game that seriously from like a real professional standpoint until this off season. So exciting stuff. Let's turn our attention to if you're trying to get hyped for the season, there's not much to watch right now. Jomez has the new show with Simon that I think debuted last night. I guess it was last night. Very nice. Check it out. It's pretty cool. It's kind of like disc golf, no reservations, a little bit. Simon kind of travel show, and Simon, is always just very telegenic. Looks it's just an enjoyable person to watch on television. But sometimes you just want to watch some actual competitive rounds. So what we're going to do is we're going to name our top 3 rewatch tournaments to get you hyped for the season. So if you're looking for something to watch and you want to go back and check something out on YouTube, I'm going to give you the top 3 rewatches of 2022. And Josh is going to give you, maybe not of all time, but like 3 great tournaments to go back and rewatch from mostly recent history. All recent history. So like you're going to be more players that you're familiar with. I mean, you could go back and watch the Climo Schultz USDGC epic. Was it 9-hole playoff? I think it was 9 holes. I mean, that is epic stuff. Mm-hmm. But maybe not as relevant to today's game. So modern era. Right. So Josh, I will let you go first. What's your number 3 rewatch of the recent past?
I would like to point out this exercise was incredibly difficult. There are so many tournaments, and I know people are going to say, how could you forget whatever? But I think there's something unique about each of these. My first recommendation, 2019 Masters Cup, specifically round 2. Ricky, Paul, Eagle, and Matt Bell play in a torrential downpour at De La Viega. Incredible round. I go back and watch this at least once a year. I love watching this tournament and this round in particular. It features top talent. It's on a really fun course to watch, and the conditions just make it, I think, even more enjoyable. I like watching players play in the rain. I think it's fun to see the way they have to change and kind of adapt to it. So I highly recommend this one if you have not seen it yet. I tried to pick a little bit of a lesser known one. Good one to go watch.
I'm also going to do a little bit more of a single round. I mean, you could watch the whole tournament for sure. But my specific single round is round 4, both divisions, Las Vegas Challenge from last year. So, yeah, we have the classic. Remember what a great start to the season it was. We have Paige versus Katrina right off the bat, and drama on 18, and a close back and forth round, and then in MPO we have Drew Gibson just playing out of his mind and chasing down Gannon Burr to force a playoff, and then an epic playoff. It's just a great round. It's almost all scoring. I think both Gannon and Drew had no bogeys in this round. So it's just great stuff. And of course, it's the first tournament of the season. So it'll get you back in the rhythm of what we're going to be seeing here coming up. A lot of fun. And, honestly, like, I don't know that I would watch all 4 rounds again, but rewatching the final round, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, in my number 2 pick, I went with the 2018 D-Glow. Paul shoots 18 down in the final round. It is a round of legend. Yes, it's classic. It's classic. You can either go watch the entire round or you can watch like summary videos from Jomez. Both are very excellent. I need someone to like confirm this in the chat. I thought I heard that Paul bought the baskets from D-Glow and put them in at his course.
I think I heard that too. I don't know if that's accurate, but I think I've heard the same thing.
Yeah.
It would make a lot of sense.
It would make a lot of sense. Go watch it if you haven't seen it. I think this is I like these picks because they are like pre-COVID. So some of our listeners who may have come in during the pandemic might not have seen these rounds yet. So if you haven't, this is another one that is just a classic that you have to go check out.
Yeah, you can watch the summary on Jomez, or you can also watch the 2-minute summary on SportsCenter because they have a package on SportsCenter about Macbeth's round with Macbeth Shakespeare quotes. It's just amazing. It's amazing.
I forgot about that.
At number 2 for me, I'm going with 2022 Champions Cup. Look, W.R. Jackson is a beautiful course. It's so much fun to watch. Wide fairway woods is not something we see very much on tour. And that is what Champions Cup delivers to you. It is just fantastic to watch. And look, you can watch every single round. I mean, you have a lot of everything, right? Chris Dickerson playing great. Paul Macbeth has the monster final round. I don't know if that does that round on video. I'm not sure that it actually is. So that's just in my mind as like a storyline, but I don't think it got filmed because he was too far down the leaderboard. But a crazy finish in FPO, and really just like aesthetically enjoyable disc golf. It was one of the things we talked about last year when we finally got to W.R. Jackson. It felt like we were kind of like in this slog of a lot of ugly courses. The Texas swing was kind of brutal.
States. Oh, my gosh.
Oh, man. Like just dusty and terrible and like baseball fences. And then we're finally like in this beautiful gorgeous Georgia springtime. I mean, it felt like the Masters, right? Where you get this like, wow, like this is enjoyable to watch from a pure, like, this is pleasant experience, not just the golf is great, but the golf was great. And I highly recommend a rewatch of that one. And Champions Cup, I think, is going to quickly ascend into one of the more important majors. I mean, I don't know where it's going to be in the pecking order. It was at the bottom last year, but I think it can move up.
It's a great one. My number one pick. Now, I really, really thought about doing 2018 Worlds. Greg Barsby, Paige Shue, Paige Shue. Yep, that's right. I was right.
Bjerkes at the time.
Bjerkes at the time. I said Shue, and I'm like, you're sure not right? It's Bjerkes at the time. It's at Smuggler's Notch, where we're having Worlds this year.
Yep.
Great flashback. Part of that appeal, though, is kind of like the unexpectedness of the winners. And so it's a good tournament to watch. But I'm picking 2021 Worlds. And look, you've probably seen the MPO coverage more times, at least of the shot, more times than you probably ever wished that you would. It's used in every advertisement by every company anymore, that we just see all the time now on coverage. But FPO was also excellent. And if you haven't gone back and rewatched at least the final round of FPO for Worlds, you have to go do that. It was, I remember when we were chatting after the FPO round, we said, even if like Paul just walks away with the final round in MPO, this is still an incredible Worlds thanks to the drama on the FPO side. I did not think there was any way that the MPO was going to match and then surpass that level of drama. I have never been more wrong in my life about anything, but it's a really excellent rewatch. Go watch the FPO coverage on Central Coast, and you can see just an incredible battle down the stretch. That's my number one pick.
I think you got to skip the open course, though.
Yeah.
I got to be real with you. I mean, there was like some drama. Paige's disc missed the Mando, but like you couldn't really tell in real time. But then like, oh no, she definitely missed the Mando. And then people were calling her a cheater. There was like some drama, but the golf course track was pretty terrible.
But
the fort was a lot of fun. You know, and that was a weird tournament because it had all these problems and there was all this drama with the PDGA and the players. But you know, at the end of the day, the driving range, the OB lines painted in the middle of the night without the knowledge of the TD. Remember that? They like went out and spray painted lines.
Do you remember the podcast with Justin
Justin PDGA
Justin
board president
with the sunglasses? Calling Brody a jerk for renting out the driving range.
Oh my God. That's just amazing stuff. Yeah, but the final round is just it's a classic. It's a classic way before the holy shot. That's the thing. Like everyone remembers that, but there was amazing disc golf played that whole week.
Yes.
And there's some incredible shot making leading up to the obviously truly epic hole 18, one of the best holes like on tour in the last 5 years.
And it has now been copied by a handful
like multiple
of
tournaments. Yes. Amazing. It's a good one to get you fired up for sure. My number one, I'm splitting it up between FPO and MPO. I mean, I think my true number one answer is 2022 European Open. But the FPO is interesting enough. It's fine. But I'm specifically looking at MPO and the McBattle. I mean, this is Eagle in the midst of a basically season-long injury that keeps him out of competitive play for the most part. Playing some of the best disc golf that's ever been played at a major. And beating Macbeth, who shoots the highest average rating ever at a major to not win. It is truly a spectacular watch of two of the best in the world ever playing their best game for 4 rounds straight on an amazing track in Europe. And I just don't think it really gets a lot better than that. Now, you don't necessarily get the crazy playoff finish. You don't necessarily have a lot of people in contention. It really was the two of them. But like, if you just want to watch amazing competition at the highest possible caliber, it really doesn't get better than that. Extremely fun, extremely entertaining. For the women's side, certainly you can watch the European Open coverage. It was pretty good, but I actually found U.S. Women's Disc Golf Championships to be the more interesting tournament last year. So I think if you want to go back and watch something now, it's an unusual event because the courses were so different from pretty much anything else that was played on tour. They were way shorter. They were much more like local courses, I guess I would call them, which was a point of criticism from a lot of especially the big arm FPO players who felt it was like a little too rinky dink. But you have to admit, the competition was extremely exciting, and there were some amazing shots. I'll never forget Haley King's eagle through the woods. Incredible. You had Maria Oliva in the mix. You had a lot of players who we didn't necessarily see up at the top of the leaderboard all the time in contention because Paige wasn't playing well and Kristen wasn't there. Yep. So very entertaining. And I think, one of the problems for just FPO competition in general last year is that there were a lot of tournaments where, Kristen won by 10 strokes or just wasn't that competitive at the top. So that's a great one because it was competitive all the way through and all 4 rounds entertaining.
Yes. Great coverage. All
right. So there's some things to go check out. All of that coverage is available on YouTube, and we hope it gets you excited for the season. We're going to take a break. When we come back, post-production media. Well, we need it because we can go back and rewatch these tournaments. There's some changes coming to the Disc Golf Pro Tour in 2023. We're talking about those next. The Upshot is presented by Pound Disc Golf, makers of the best bags in the sport. And there's a lot of top pros out there carrying a Pound bag. Check out the list of Pound ambassadors for 2023. Nate Sexton, Big Germ Jeremy Colling, Valerie Mondahano, Mason Ford, Christian Dietrich, Dustin Keegan, Zoe Andyke, Vanessa Van Dyken, Joel Freeman, Aaron Gossage, Ella Hansen, Gavin Babcock, Casey White, and Cole Redalin. An incredible group of pros who will almost certainly see some Elite Series wins out of this year, and they're all carrying a Pound bag. Get yours today at pounddiscgolf.com. Welcome back to The Upshot. So earlier today, the Disc Golf Pro Tour announcing its 2023 post-production media plan. So they have some existing partners, they have some new partners, and they have some changes in store for 2023. And Josh, I think we have to begin with what I think is the biggest news here, which is that Jomez returns. That's not the biggest news. We knew that. They were on a 2-year contract. Remember, they signed $250,000 a year deal with the Pro Tour. But they are covering not only MPO lead card, but also FPO lead card in 2023 at all of the Elite Series events. What do you think about this move? It's been a long time since we've seen Jomez cover consistent FPO.
This could be one of the biggest drivers of FPO, the FPO side of the game in a decade. Jomez is one of the biggest reasons that disc golf has the popularity that it does today. It is overwhelmingly the most consumed form of media still. It has hundreds. I mean, some of the most popular videos on Jomez have literally hundreds of thousands of views.
Yeah, millions.
People go back and watch. Millions, yes. I mean, it is incredibly popular and a central point of the culture of this sport. And for FPO now, and that's something I've heard this critique countless times, is that people will go for FPO coverage and they don't feel like the post-produced coverage gets the same treatment that the MPO side does from Jomez. And it's fair because I think Jomez does post-produce better than anybody. They are the top tier in terms of just the quality of the image, how well they are at positioning their cameras. But this is the other big point. It's also thanks to incredibly beloved commentators, big sexy commentary, and now, and bring Paul Ulibarri into the mix is been one of the biggest factors about the success of Jomez. People loved Big Germ and Nate Sexton on coverage. It is going to be absolutely imperative that they get good commentators on the FPO side who have that same ability to create a cultural appeal and brand for Jomez on the FPO side. And if they can successfully pick those commentators, this is going to be, I don't even know the adjectives to use, because I think this is such a big deal that cannot be overstated.
I mean, it's very interesting because, FPO coverage doesn't get watched as much as MPO. That's not news. But having it on the biggest channel and the biggest platform is going to put it in front of more people. And I do think that there is tangible value in the kind of just the enjoyability factor that Jomez offers, with just like the way that it is to watch the round. Like, there's just little things, whether it's graphics or color or, just camera placement, just like the little things that set them apart from some of the other YouTube post-production outfits. Like, you do notice it. You do notice the difference. And like, there's people prefer to watch on Jomez, and you may not even be able to pinpoint exactly why, but it's the little things that add up to kind of like that production quality feel that they bring to the table. So having FPO being able to get that treatment, I've actually always kind of thought it was a little bit weird. Jomez will do like, on social media, they'll be like, women who crush Wednesday. And I'm like, it just feels a little disingenuous because they're never really covering women's disc golf at all. Mm-hmm. And not to say that they, don't want to or something. At the end of the day, there's business decisions getting made about what's getting watched the most. And I'm curious to find out if there's business behind this deal. Like, did Jomez want this? Did the Pro Tour say, hey, we really want you to start covering FPO? Is there compensation happening there? But I agree with you, Josh. I think this is a big deal, and I think that they will manage to find commentators. I don't know how quickly that will happen. It wasn't automatically just Germ and Sexton from the jump.
Right.
It was kind of a mishmash of people back in the day, and then they finally found this combination that really felt like it worked, and they've stuck with it for years. So will we see something similar on the FPO side? Maybe they already have people picked out. I asked Jonathan Gomez, but I only texted him 15 minutes ago, and he hasn't gotten back to me yet. So we'll see. The other notes here, there will be MPO2 and FPO2 coverage at all Elite Series events. Now, that did not happen all the time last year. So Gatekeeper will return to do MPO2 coverage, as well as the Champions Cup and Worlds on the major side. Jomez is doing Champions Cup, Worlds, and U.S. Women's. And so what does that leave out there? No European.
No USDGC, no European Open.
No USDGC. Because, of course, they kind of have their own media deals. And we'll see what happens with those later this year. Ace Run Pro is coming on board to do FPO2 coverage this year. So, European Open and USDGC coverage will all be exclusive to the Disc Golf Network. That's actually in the press release. So, FPO2 coverage, more depth of coverage, and I think that's important that the tour continues to try to make sure that there's media coverage on both sides in equal parts.
Mm-hmm. We also have Central Coast Disc Golf is going to be covering all silver event post production
on its own channel this time.
Yes, that's both MPO and FPO. I think that's really, I'm really glad that that's the case. I think that there's an opportunity here, and it's smart of Central Coast to put it on their own YouTube channel, because there's a lot of new silver series silver events that I'm excited to watch. and I will be watching the Central Coast. I don't know if I'm going to be able to watch them live, but I will absolutely be watching the Central Coast coverage for a handful of these tournaments because I want to see how Kayak Point plays, and I want to see how.
I have some unfortunate news for you, Josh.
No.
Apparently, they're not going to be able to have that silver event at that course.
I was so excited about that course.
I know. Apparently, there's some kind of money contractual terms dispute. Maybe the course wants a lot of money. I don't know the details yet, but it doesn't sound like it's going to be happening there, which I feel like there's always some weird thing that happens in the Pacific Northwest with a tournament where like they have to change last minute or something. So it sucks. I don't understand what's going on there, but that was one of the ones I was most excited for too.
Boo. All right. Well, it still stands. There's a lot of good courses to watch. I think this is smart for Central Coast, and I'm glad that there's going to be post-produced coverage on both sides for all those events.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see the Pro Tour moving away from putting this coverage on its own YouTube channel. Does that signal a shift for the future? Right. I think there's been somewhat of at least a question about, is the Pro Tour just going to try to consolidate all of the coverage onto its own platforms?
Yeah. And
we still don't really know what's going to happen, in 2024, right? The Jomez contract, all these contracts end at the end of 2023. So what's going to happen next year? It's a much more interesting conversation, but I like the moves here. The other big thing that you'll notice, right? GK Pro was covering FPO1 this year, and they're not on the list for any of these. What's happening with GK Pro? Well, they are going to be they're going to be focusing on their skins matches, which is, they've already been doing that, but they are becoming a spectator event taking place before each Elite Series event begins. And I'm quoting from the press release here. This will be a part of a new practice day ticketing initiative from DGPT that will allow fans to spectate the final day of practice before each tournament starts, including access to special autograph signing sessions from tour card players. So a little bit more of a collaboration there with GK Pro and the tour, and like more access to players in the practice round setting, a more casual setting. You can watch the skins get taped. Pretty interesting stuff, Josh.
Yeah, I'm curious when are these skins going to get released? What's the production schedule going to look like for them? Because that's something that I think is always an interesting balance, right? Because if you're releasing it as the tournament's happening, I mean, there's live coverage that people are going to be watching, but if you release it, especially in the thick of the season, even right after a tournament, I think that your players who are really, really dedicated live followers struggle to watch skins as much because, you finish on Sunday, even if skins comes out Monday, you're starting another tournament Thursday sometimes, right? I mean, the turnaround is just so quick during the thick of the season. So I'm curious about the production channel. I think this is a really smart move for spectator events, though. I think it's going to help sell, obviously, a new ticket, which is the practice day tickets. But more importantly, I think you've got a better chance at selling weekend tickets because now there is seen as additional value to not just because right now it's easy just to say I'm going to just buy a Sunday ticket or just a Saturday and Sunday ticket rather than a full 4-day or 3-day ticket because round one just isn't as significant. You don't get to, it's harder to see all the players that you want to see if you're following those cards because it's just not consolidated yet. It's just randomly distributed. So I think this is a really smart initiative in order to bring in more spectators and making these events just a consistent, dependable spectator experience, regardless of which event you're going to.
Yeah, and the GK Pro guys, at least last year, were pretty heavily involved in helping DGN with live coverage stuff or getting drone coverage for the tour. So I think we'll probably continue to see that. It's kind of like an extension a little bit of the DGN arm. So interesting stuff. Going to be a lot of disc golf to watch, whether you like to watch it live or on post-production. So
that's for sure.
We'll certainly be keeping an eye on this story for what's going to come up in 2024, but let's just enjoy the 2023 season first. That is going to do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you get your subscription today, discgolf.ultiworld.com/subscribe. Get all of our bonus segments inside the circle. and Rapid Reacts coming very soon. All-Stars LVC on the way. So, for Josh Mansfield, I'm Charlie Eisenhood saying so long. We'll talk to you Thursday right here on The Upshot.